Okay, so in this next hand, we're focusing on table 3 now with the King Queen offsuit. It falls to the button who opens, and we go ahead and 3-bet. Again, I'm not going to go too much into the pre-flop play. I guess just watch part 1 if you want to know why we 3-bet late position raises in deep ante games. And we flop fairly well here, obviously. We've got trips with Queen Kicker, the top kicker really, given that he's going to 4-bet Ace King, I think, pre-flop. We go ahead here and just make a standard C bet. Again, it's like on table 1 before with the paired dry flop. We'd C bet this with our entire range, and so I see no reason not to bet it when we actually have a hand. We definitely want to balance our bluffs, and we're going to get some very loose pills here. I think because of that, he can pill pretty much any pair. Ace Jack and Ace Queen I think will pill us as well. A 10 will pill us, so we can get a lot of calls from worse. So definitely some value to be had by betting. I don't really see any reason to check there. Now on the turn, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. I decided to go ahead here and check the turn. It might be a little bit tricky, but I think it's fairly standard for me. And I guess I'll just go into the reasons why. There's a few reasons. The first reason is that I think he's quite likely to have floated us, as I said on this flop. With a hand like, well, he could float with pure air, firstly, although I think that's slightly less likely. Maybe something like 9-8 of diamonds. He's also going to float us with like sixes here and eights, which I think he actually might bet on the turn once we check to him, because he doesn't want to get counterfeited, and he figures that if he has the best hand, then he wants to bet and protect his hand before a bad river rolls off. And he's also going to have a few hands like Ace Jack or Ace Queen, which if we check to him, I think he might bet because, or Queen Jack, which I think he might bet because he doesn't want to just check it down and lose to a better ace high, or like, with ace jack versus ace queen, I guess, pretty small range there. But I just basically think there's a lot of hands we can introduce floats from. So that's basically one very standard reason to check here. Another reason is that in terms of the made hands in his range, they're all going to be fairly weak made hands, like a pair of tens or a pair of eights. But if we bet against those hands, I actually think he's pretty much always going to fold those on the turn because he's worried that he can't get to showdown. He's worried about a big bet on the river, and we're actually losing out on value against those hands because I think if we check, let him see a cheap river and then bet the river, we're much more likely to get caught by a hand like tens or pocket jacks than we are if we bet the turn. And so although we like forego the chance of getting all in by checking the turn, we actually I think maximize our value against his made hands, and as I said before, we maximize value in the sense that we reduce from floats. The other reason I guess I'd check here is because there's really no hand I'm betting here for value. Like, I could bet here with aces, but I'd probably check it for the same reasons as I'd check the king here, namely to reduce from floats, because I don't want to scare off a 10 just yet, and I can't get 3 streets of value from a 10. So when I do bet here, there's no real hands I'm betting here other than a king here really. So to balance the fact that I'm pretty much checking my entire range, I kind of like checking here and just making my range protected, disguised, and also stronger than it otherwise would be. I don't want to be able to check here and let him know that I never have a king. The one reason you do want to bet, I think, is he may have a hand like Queen Jack, which we don't want to give a free card to, which I think will peel the turn. I think Ace Jack and Ace Queen will fold the turn, but Queen Jack may peel. But other than that, I don't really think that's enough reason to bet. I think if the board had two clubs rather than the flop had two clubs, sorry, rather than having a second club turn, I think then you'd have a lot more reason to bet the turn. And in fact, I think I would. Not only then because you're charging all the draws, but you can also represent a draw yourself, and you're going to get looked up much lighter than you are on this particular board. Where if you barrel this board, you're never getting looked up light, I don't think. So if this flop was two-tone, then definitely I think a turn bet is called for. But when it's monotone like this, I kind of like checking and just, as I said, balancing the fact that I'm checking my entire range here almost, and then introducing from floats and getting value from river from marginal hands, getting value on the river from marginal hands. So on the turn he bets. He bets a little bit smaller than I'd like, but I go ahead here, obviously check call. I don't think check raising here does too much either. It just looks ludicrously strong. And he's just going to, I think, fold all worse hands and only continue with better, if any pocket tens, king ten type hand. Maybe he floated with fours and he has hit a set there. I don't think he's ever going to course down with worse if we check raise other than with king jack precisely, or maybe he defended with like king nine suited. But we're getting a bit we're getting a little bit speculative there because, I mean, there's only one king left in the deck. So I check call. The river comes back to flush, which isn't a great card to be honest. He could easily have something like ace jack or ace queen of clubs. He could also have queen jack of clubs, or he could have a float with clubs that floated me and then bet the turn when he picked up a flush draw. So there's definitely a few hands that that completes, but I think if he bets, we have to call here. But we wouldn't check raise for that reason. So he bets and we call, and he has king jack. So obviously that's probably the only one hand that we missed value from by not betting the turn large and then betting the river large. But I think on the whole we took the best line and the line that maximized our value. So that's that hand. Okay, this time we're focusing on table 4 with our ace king here on the button. So J Lizard opens, and I go ahead and 3-bet on the button. That's pretty standard. I guess one thing that is actually important in this hand is the fact that J Lizard does not have the full $500 buy-in, and because of that, I sort of pegged him as possibly a weaker player. Not necessarily a fish, but probably if he was a reg, definitely a weaker reg, because I think most good regs would buy in for the full amount. And this is important information for our flop play. So on the flop, it comes another pair dry flop. It seems like that's the theme of this video. But yeah, it comes another pair dry flop, and he checks to us with ace king. Now, if we recall hand 1 on table 1, I said that if we check back our king 8 suited on jack jack 8, our hand would be very face up as a hand like, you know, a pair of eights, a small pair, or a good ace high like ace king or ace queen, which kind of implies that I would check back an ace king or ace queen there sometimes. And so I thought what I'd do with this hand is sort of talk about the reasons why I may check back ace king or ace queen here, and the reasons I would bet. So for pretty much the same reasons, checking back ace king does turn our hand very face up. And although we probably have the best hand, it may set us up for getting bluffed off later in the hand if he's the sort of player who's going to take advantage of that and try to blow us off our hand. And again, this is not a player that I'm really comfortable checking here to induce 2 streets of bluffs from, because we just don't have that history. So what you want to know when you're deciding whether to check or bet here with ace king is whether your opponent is going to give you a lot of trouble later, or whether you can see showdown fairly easily. Against a player who is going to let you see showdown, and most likely that's going to be a fairly weak player, then I'm quite comfortable checking ace king back here, because quite frankly there's no real worse hands that we're getting value from, and there's no better hands that we're folding out. I mean, he's going to call any pair. We might get value from ace queen for 1 street, but that's pretty much it. So I kind of like checking back ace king. I think ace king checking back here is probably the best play in a vacuum. But against a good player who will take advantage of that and put me into some tough spots later, I prefer betting for the same reasons as I said in table 1. On table 1 and in hand 1, namely you don't turn your hand face up. If we bet this flop, we can have a lot of things in our range. We can have all our over pairs. We can have a jack. We can have pocket 4s. And then obviously mid pairs and ace king and ace queen. Whereas if we check back, our range becomes a lot more defined. And against a good player who's going to give you trouble, as I've said throughout this video, that's not something you want to do when you're playing deep stacked, because you're going to get into some pretty tough spots. And so what I guess the relevance of his stack size was, I presumed that given his he looks to be probably a weaker egg, I figured that this was the sort of player who would let me see showdown fairly cheaply, who would let me see 2 more cards probably for free, and so I decided to check it back. Now when he leads on the turn, you might think, well, then we should fold if that was your read, since that's inconsistent with what you just said about him being someone who's going to let you see showdown. But obviously I can't be completely sure of that read, and I think when we do check here, we should call the turn here pretty much always, especially on this turn. He can have hands like ace 5 and 5-6 and 5-7, and you know, flush draws, and he may also have just we may also have just induced a bluff, since it looks like we've checked, and as I said, you know, people might try to take advantage of that, and people might take advantage of that and try to bet you off your marginal face-up hand by betting turn and river. So I go ahead and call, and the reason, I'm pretty much always calling the turn in that spot with ace king. The problem is that most of the time I'm then going to fold the river, because I think most people will shut down, and against tough opponents who bet with decent frequencies of bluffs and thin value bets, I'll have to fold against probably, and that's why I'm concerned about checking back ace king. But I think most people will give up, and I think calling the turn is fine, just trying to see a showdown. Yep. Now on the river we hit a king, so when he bets again, now we have an easy call. So we're pretty fortunate there. But if this river bricked like, I don't know, say a 10 or something, I think I'd have to fold here. I wouldn't call here. As I said, I just don't have a good enough rate on this player, and he can very easily value bet very thin on a lot of rivers because it's just very face up what I have. So if it did come at 10, I think I'd fold. But when it comes to king, I'm just going to call because he could value bet worse and be bluffing. In this particular case, he was bluffing, but he did pick up flush draw on the turn. So I'm not necessarily wrong on my flop rate, I don't think. I'm not sure, if this came to 3 of clubs, whether he'd still take a stab at the 10-7 of diamonds here. He may or may not. But in the end, this hand worked out very well for us. He did pick up a flush draw, he stabbed at it, which he's going to do pretty much always, and then we managed to river king, so we had an easy call, and then he bluffed into us.